Hello, my name is Brenda Sanchez and I'm a water quality specialist for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I work up in the Agricultural Water Quality Program. And I just want to welcome all of you to the Plan for Your Land 2022. And I'm going to talk about water resources. But before we get started on our presentation today, I wanted to kind of loosen up your brain and get you thinking about water in a fun way and with some fun facts. I think something that's really interesting is the fact that there's the same amount of water on Earth as there was when the Earth was formed. There's this finite amount of water, and it is most of it, 97% of it, is in the world's salty or otherwise undrinkable water resources, such as our oceans. 2% of our water resources are locked up in our ice caps and our glaciers, at our poles, at North and South poles. And, unbelievably, that leaves just 1% for all of humanity needs. That's 1% of all of our water that we can use for agriculture, our residences, for making things, for making our community beautiful, and our personal needs. And that's striking, and something that I want to point out is that how little water we really do have around the world, and how precious it is, and how much we really want to take time to conserve it and protect the quality of it. I thought another good item was, 75% of our brain is water, and 75% of a living tree is water. And the average total home water around the U.S. is about 50 gallons a day. But in a recent study, water consumption in the last 5 years has actually went way down across the U.S. But however, Western states such as Washington and Oregon, Idaho actually has the highest consumption rate per person at 168 gallons per person, and in Oregon we average about 113 gallons of water per person. And a lot of that has to do with irrigation and keeping in our agriculture and our needs. So we do use more water, but it's down, and a lot of that can be contributed to changes in irrigation systems and conservation. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that as I go forward in my slideshow. So just to start, get you thinking about how do you value water? And the state of Oregon has designated beneficial uses to our water supplies. It's identified the values that we all seek out of our water resources. Everything from just looking at it and in the calmness of being outside, boating, fishing, irrigation and livestock watering. And, most importantly, is our public water supply. Something I think we all can feel we value. Also, our fish and wildlife depend on our water resources. So there's lots of beneficial uses that we all take part of in using our waters. So water quality management in Oregon has been ongoing for some time. Way back in the 1930s, Oregonians were concerned about their water supply and the pollution. So today I'm going to talk about subject matters that will help you complete your exercise and give you a really broad overview of water quality management in Oregon. So water quality management in Oregon. Rules and regulations started coming about back in 1972 after the Clean Water Act was adopted to protect drinking water. Once the Clean Water Act was in place, the federal government asked the states to manage their own water quality resources, and in doing so asked each state to develop their own set of water quality standards and to put into place programs and regulations to protect the state's water resources. In Oregon, we have the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and they are the main agency regulating water quality. However, it was delegated to the Oregon Department of Forestry and the Oregon Department of Agriculture to regulate water quality, regulate pollution from those land uses. So Oregon Department of Ag, we regulate pollution from agricultural activities, and the Oregon Department of Forestry regulates pollution from forestry activities. Oregon Department of Environmental Quality also regulates all of those point sources that I'll talk about later, but wastewater plants, industrial. So they manage all the permits for that, city stormwater drainage. So they're very busy handling that while we're very busy handling our associated land uses. So ODA's water quality program began over 20 years ago, around 1997. The agricultural community felt it was best to manage water quality at the local level, so ODA created 38 agricultural water quality management areas around the state based on watershed boundaries, agriculture, and climate. Because a rancher on the east side is going to manage his property much differently than a dairy farmer on the west side of Oregon. The map shows here the boundaries of the agriculture water quality management areas. I know we have folks here from different areas. If you're in Clackamas, you're in the Clackamas, let me get my pointer here. You're in the Clackamas management area. If you're here from Marion County, you're in the Molalla, Pudding River, French Prairie, North Santiam management area. And if you're in Lynn, there's the South Santiam management area. Plans and rules. So all three of these have its own area plan and its own set of area rules. However, all three have two area rules in common. And one is the Streamside vegetation rule, which requires landowners to allow for the ongoing growth and establishment of streamside vegetation. And there's also the waste rule, which states that landowners, or anybody for that matter, cannot place a waste such as manure or fertilizers or things on your farm. Soil erosion and sediment off your property is considered waste, and it basically says you can't pollute the state's water resources. So those rules apply through our agricultural water quality program. If you need copies of those, they are on our website, and you can contact me if you're interested in knowing where that is. We also have in our program two initiatives. We have our Focus Area Initiative, which allows soil and water conservation districts to work in a small watershed and focus technical assistance to landowners and residents based on the needs in that watershed. And then there's the Strategic Implementation Areas Initiative that I'm the statewide lead for. The Strategic Implementation Areas is similar to our focus area, where ODA works in small watersheds, working with landowners to address any water quality concerns in the watershed. There are focus areas and strategic implementation areas in all of your three management areas. Also, the Soil and Water Conservation Program is housed in the Ag Water Quality Program. And we also have a new program, the Agricultural Drainage Channel Program. And channel maintenance, actually, it's called now. And this applies to individuals who are looking to clean out sediment in a stream that is dry in the summer and wants to do that and not have to go through the Department of State Lands permitting review. They can call or notify the Department of Agriculture that they want to do that, and they can work through that process to see if they can use the program, qualify for the program, and if so, ODA issues a permit to allow them to do that work. So you can contact me or go to our website and talk to us over there, and we can get you more information regarding that. So water quality concerns in the Willamette Valley. Well, I wanted to show this photo here. It's from the 1930s. It's from West Salem, somewhere along the Willamette River. And as you can see, we've come a long way. We know better, we do better. We manage our garbage and we manage our pollution far better than we ever did. And we need to pat ourselves on the back, the generations that have come through since the Clean Water Act was instituted, and how we've just cleaned up our waterways. But there are still pending issues. There are still concerns, and some of these are in perpetuity. They'll always be a concern, but we need to be mindful of them, and I wanted to let you all know what those concerns are in the Willamette Valley. We have stream temperature that is listed as an impairment for many of our streams, if not all of our streams here in the Willamette Valley. Stream temperature is really important for fish and wildlife and just the overall health of our stream systems. Bacteria can enter streams and waterways and groundwater from many sources, animal sources, livestock, horses, cows, chickens, and humans. So we have to pay attention to how our waste is managed from our homes. Sediment in our streams is a big issue. It again is bad for fish and wildlife. It clogs our streams. It degrades them. You end up with more flooding. You end up with a lot of issues related to sediment. Not only that, and sediment ends up in our stream from soil erosion. And sediment is also bound to these other pollutants that we're concerned about: nutrients, pesticides, metals, fertilizers, toxics. They bind to soil particles, and so when the soil leaves our ground and enters a waterway, it's most likely carrying some other pollutant, particularly metals. They're natural in the system, and we want to keep them in the ground. So point and non-point sources of pollution. Well, point source pollution is any single identifiable source of pollution from which pollutants are discharged, such as a pipe, a ditch, a ship, or a factory smokestack. Now, non-point source pollution can be a little more difficult to understand because there's no point of where it's coming from. It generally results from land runoff, rainwater, from the air deposition, drainage, seepage into our water supplies, and then hydrologic modification, so changing the way water moves in our watersheds. Non-point source pollution is caused by rainfall and snow melt moving over and through the ground, and as the runoff moves, it picks up and carries away natural and human-made pollutants, finally depositing them into lakes, rivers, wetlands, coastal waters, and groundwaters. So as you can see, pollutants can come from all over the place. And when you're doing your plans for your property, that's what you're going to want to think about. Where are your point sources and non-point sources of pollutants, and will anything leave your property and enter waters of the state, such as streams, wetlands, groundwater? These are things you'll want to think about. So there are lots of agencies that have jurisdiction over our water, and it can be quite confusing and daunting when you're trying to figure it all out. For example, we have the Department of State Lands. They regulate wetlands and streams. So if you want to do work or use a wetland or modify your stream, you have to talk to the Department of State Lands and get a permit to do that. Oregon Water Resources Department, they manage and regulate water storage and water rights. So if you want to put a pump in a creek and take water and irrigate your property, you have to have a water right to do that. And you would go to the Oregon Water Resources Department to see if you may have water rights already with your property, or if you can establish them. However, very difficult, if not impossible at this time in the Willamette Valley. I'm pretty sure they're not giving out new water rights at this time, but nevertheless, if you're in need of them, give them a call. Now, the Oregon Department of Agriculture, where I work, this is where, like I was talking about earlier, about our management areas and our rules and regulations. So we have our area plans. This is a cover of one on the left here. And basically that's our voluntary side. This is, hey, these are things that are concerned to the community here in the watershed. And these are ways that as agriculture you can prevent pollution. And then it has lots of ways to and practices. It lists practices you can use, and it talks about the regulations. And then it also kind of reports out how we're doing. So in the last chapter of that, you can see where agriculture is in managing for water quality in your watershed. And on the right is just a summary that we have on our website of the area regulations and the area plan in your area. So if you're interested in that, contact your local soil and water conservation district or the Department of Agriculture. And we also have a new program that just started from legislature, House bill from a year and a half ago now, I think. It's the agricultural channel drainage maintenance, and it is designed to help farmers, ranchers keep their dry ditches clean of sediment. So if you have to remove sediment out of a ditch that's dry in the summer, you used to have to go through the Department of State Lands to get a permit. You can now call the Department of Agriculture and put in a notification that you're interested in doing some work like that, and they'll help you walk through that notification process. And if you qualify, you don't need the DSL wetland or stream permit to clean out your dry ditch. Please contact the Oregon Department of Agriculture off our website or me, and I can get you connected to the folks that work in that program. As I mentioned earlier, the Oregon Department of Forestry, they too regulate water quality from forestry practices, and they have their Forest Practices Act. They have a full manual of guidelines and standards and best management practices that you have to follow when you're completing forestry activities on your property. You'll want to contact your local forest stewardship officer in this county from the Department of Forestry. And then of course there's city and county stormwater ordinances. There's if you want to check and understand your rules and obligations to how you manage drainage from your property based on your city and county ordinances. And so now the big part of why you're attending these classes is to write a plan for your land, and that process is what's really most important. The actual document will be something that you'll always reference and go back to and update and change over time. As a matter of fact, when I worked for the Marion Soil and Water Conservation District many years ago, I went to a property over near in Sublimity, and it was a beautiful farm property. They were having trouble with a stream. They're having really big erosion from some big storm events that were occurring, and asked me to come by and take a look at it. And in doing so, they brought out a conservation plan that their grandfather had done in the 1940s, way back before computers and mapping applications. And it was this most beautiful, thought out, well-planned conservation plan that the family had been implementing for 70, 80 years. It was amazing. And all their maps were hand-drawn, and it was just a really nice thing to see that something like that lasting through time and family tradition and handing it down. So maybe that's a way you can think about your plan, is something you'll be able to hand off to your family potentially in a succession planning situation, and they can follow what you've started and keep building and growing on the stewardship you've had of your lands. So again, I'm about to go into a broad overview of items. It's up to you to do the hard thinking and apply what you learned today in your plan. Again, everyone has a different set of issues and constraints on their property, and you'll have to tailor the details of water quality management to your operations and land use. Again, and things may not always work, but you need to keep tweaking it and looking to see and find what those long-term solutions are, so you don't have to keep battling the issues, and it also saves money in your pocketbook over time. So one of the broad things I want you to learn about is the hydrologic cycle. This is really important to why we have water. Water is in 3 different states. We all remember this from high school science. We got liquid water, solid water, and we have air, water in our air. We know that as rain and stream water and ice, right? And so all the water that I was talking to you, that finite amount of water, is going through the hydrologic cycle, and it's always in some stage of that form. And so that's really important to know when you're looking where you're at in your watershed, and just understanding how water moves through your watershed. Now, watersheds are a really important concept, and they're really important to you because you live in one and you work in one. And a watershed, you know, is really it's got some scientific definitions, but it's basically where when rainwater hits the top of your edge rims of your watershed, look at it as sort of like a bowl. So when the rain comes in, the snow comes in, where does it hit and land and run off? And what makes our watershed so important to our stability and human life is the fact that the watershed captures that precipitation, it captures that rain, it captures that snow, and then it stores it. And then eventually it slowly releases the water through snow melt and summer temperatures, and all that water gets delivered to us to where we use it from. And so you think of a healthy watershed's like that sponge. It's collecting the water, storing it, and then we release it. Now, that release of water we know as surface water drainage. And it comes down and it hits the ground. And what's important about that capture part of your watershed is what's on the ground. If you had a bowl of glass, when you put water in it, it all slides down and collects in the bottom of the bowl. Well, you don't want that. You want it to be captured throughout the watershed so that you have that water resource through the summer. And impervious surfaces such as like the forest here in the woodland here on the far left diagram shows that that type of system has very little runoff because there's so many plants and trees and roots, and it just captures the plants are capturing the water, they're taking it, and what they don't use, they run down into the ground, and it all goes into the ground and trickles down through and recharges our groundwater and comes out into our streams. And then there are other situations here where maybe you have a meadow up in the mountains there and it's all covered in grass. It too is infiltrating water really well and has very little runoff. It all goes into the ground where it's supposed to. As you come down lower into the watershed and you get into the agricultural parts, as long as you have cover by either a crop or a cover crop, that too is absorbing and taking in all that water, and so you have less runoff, similar to your woods and meadow situations. As we get down into the interface between ag and residential and urban, things start to change a lot. You have more covered surfaces, you have rooftops and driveways and roads, and that water isn't sinking in there. It's running off, and it's either going into grass or going into a drainage system that takes it into the streams and ditches. And then when you get to the city, most of the city is not permeable. The rainwater hits the roofs and the streets, and where there is greenery and ground cover, it's being absorbed, but most of it runs off into the urban city drainage system, and eventually it all goes right out to our streams and oceans. So the point of this matter is to really note how vegetation plays a huge role in that capture function of a watershed. Now, something that's real important to think about too on your property is subsurface drainage, water drainage. Now, as I said, water permeates into the ground where you have vegetation, and as you can see in this diagram, it shows you how some goes into the stream, but a lot of it goes into subsurface drainage. So when you're on your own property, it's really important to think about drainage. Are you getting flooding and ponding in areas of your property? Are certain areas wet below your feet all year long? Are you having some subsurface drainage in that way. So you're going to want to think about those things. It's really important when you're managing for your water quality off of your property. And as I talked about earlier, we do have responsibilities toward that. When you do your planning, if you can incorporate all this into it and build it into your system, you're going to have a far easier experience in managing for water quality and conserving water than others may have who are not. So I'm going to get into the next topic, and I'm not deviating at all from water resources, but one of an important understanding in managing for water quality, and I'll get to those points eventually, is understanding soil health. And I'm sure you're going to talk about this in your soil sections, but soil health as defined is the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. It really comes down to the microbes in the soil. How healthy are those microbes? Do they have the things they need to live healthy? Do they have structure, home, food, all the same things we need? So that's really important to soil health. And it also, soil health can address really important soil properties such as organic matter, soil structure, and nutrient cycling, which is all pertinent to that microbe health of the soil. So there's definitely a lot to talk about soil health, and I don't have a whole lot of time to talk about all the details. So again, I'm keeping it broad. And in general, there's 4 basic principles for managing for soil health. You want to minimize soil disturbance. You want to maintain a diverse plant mix on, a diversity of plants. You want to keep live green cover and living roots as much as possible throughout the year. And you want to keep bare soil covered. And the reasons that if you manage for soil health and why soil health is important in water quality management, because there are key soil properties that function to capture, store, and release water, and that's which influences how pollutants such as nutrients, bacteria, and pesticide residues are transported to ground and surface water. So we link it back to those water quality concerns I talked about earlier, and back to that process and function of a watershed. And here in this diagram, it tells you some big cornerstones of healthy soil, and one of them is the water benefits. So soil health, water quality and conservation. So how does managing for soil health help me in my property and keep me from polluting? Well, first of all, you get increased water infiltration. By following those principles, you'll get increased water infiltration, which extends the amount and duration of plant available water. That means you don't have to irrigate or water in June. Maybe you have enough water left in the soil because you have ground cover to last your hold water until maybe July if you were to irrigate. Improved drainage. You have less flooding and less ponding in your property. You're also recharging groundwater by reducing surface runoff that enters storm drains and irrigation runoff that goes into the street and goes into a drain or goes off down the road to a culvert. Eventually, all of that runoff gets to our streams and our ocean. And if you live rurally and you are on a well, you really want your groundwater to be recharged because that's your water resource. It also, by having good soil health and a good soil microbe health soil system, you can decrease the occurrence of plant disease and pest problems, which allows less reliance on pesticide, which means less runoff, less pesticide residues in stormwater runoff. And it also improves nutrient cycling by having the ground cover that provides food for the microbes. You don't need as much fertilization to put those nutrients into the soil. They're getting them from the plants, and that means less fertilizer and nutrients in our surface runoff. Here in this picture I have here is just a mulch versus no mulch, and the moisture retention and the yield. And here with mulch, very little of the water that's in the soil evaporates, and so you're holding that water into your soil longer. And without mulch, it says up to 80% of rainwater evaporates, so you're losing that soil water holding capacity. One of the important things for managing for soil health is the fact that it will help you in manage soil erosion and improve the water quality in your watershed and reducing soil loss. Here in this picture here, there's two pictures I took at a compliance investigation. Here we had a pasture. These lands, these hillsides were used as pasture land, and in this situation, they had been using a tractor up there to do something, and left it there and went into the winter, and they had this really bad soil erosion issue as a result. The soil coming off the hillside ran to the ditch along the road, and then overtopped the ditch and ran across the road into the field on the right photo, and then drained toward that stream where the trees are. There's a stream, and it went directly discharged into that stream. So by having that ground covered, even the hill pasture side next to it was not bare ground, and there was no soil erosion. All of this sediment was coming directly from this location. So these are things you want to, one reason why managing those 4 principles of soil health by keeping the ground covered would have helped prevented that storm water from eroding that bare soil and taking it to the stream. And here's a great photo that shows an experiment that we do in soil health presentations. If we were in person, I'd be able to do something like this for you and show you. But in this photo, let me see if I can get the pointer here. In our 5 different ground cover scenarios, you have far left bare. In the next container, you have some broadleaf, well-covered ground. The third container is stubble left over from the year's growth. This fourth one is simulating a well-grassed covered area, and this last one may look like some of the pastures you've seen, interstitial bare ground, very little vegetation. And then they simulated a rainwater onto these 5 experiments, and the water drains out. And as you can see in this bare covered experiment, you can see the water is really dark. It took sediment from this container through water and moved it into this jar. So it didn't protect water quality. In this one with the broadleaf, very little water drained off originally. And when it did, you can see in the back, it is a little darker, but it's not as dark as this one on the left. With the stubble, it did produce water. This isn't covered enough and live enough for the water to drain out clean. Whereas in the grass section, you can see again, look, no water. It barely drained originally, and when it finally did through the soil into the background jug, you can see it's clean, or pretty clean when compared to these other ones. And same with the pasture type situation, where you have a lot of runoff, it's dirty, and same in the back. Your water going into the ground is taking some of that soil with it. And also what's to notice is the water that in this ground cover, the bare one, most of that water drained off right away, and what went through the water profile into the back jug was very little. So, and this concept of soil cover and managing to reduce runoff leaving your property with any pollutants in it, it works on any scale. I mean, you can do it on a family farm or a large ag field. You just have to apply it to where it is. So what can you do to control and minimize soil erosion on your property? If you're farming, you can practice conservation tillage. Lots of information about that out there. You also, one really good thing about this stuff is you can contact the Soil and Water Conservation District or a local watershed council and get information about this information, or your Natural Resource Conservation Service. They all are experts, and they're all public service, and they can all help you with this stuff. So you can practice conservation tillage. You can roll and crimp and chop those plant residues into the topsoil. Planting a diverse mix of species, having lots of different plants, helps. If you're farming, maybe you don't want a monoculture. Maybe you do crop rotations throughout the year to address that, or you have one part of your property is growing this and you're growing that, or you're keeping things growing in the aisles. There's all kinds of ways to artfully try to do that. Also intercropping, like I was saying, putting other things in your aisles, growing, for example, I saw early establishment hazelnut orchard planting strawberries in their aisles in the early years of the establishment, because there's a lot of bare ground. And also rotating crops, like I talked about, and utilizing winter cover crops. If your field's going to go fallow, don't leave it uncovered. Get something on there that can grow, provide protection against soil erosion, potentially add nutrients and other yummy things to your soil, and you might even find a cover crop you can make some money from. Of course, there's a lot of timing and a lot of thought into that as well. Plant trees and shrubs in the borders and hard to farm areas, so along access roads, farm areas, corners, where you have bare ground and you're not growing something, put something in there that'll help stabilize that soil. Bare ground, in soil science there's a saying, bare soil is dead soil. So if you don't have anything on it, those microbes can't do what they need to do to help produce all that beautiful green harvest you want to take and crops that you want to grow. Again, these can work at any scale. If you're here because you have a small woodland or you're a forest owner here, there are major water quality concerns from woodlands and forests. Bacteria, sediment, nutrients, pesticide residues, metals, all the things we've talked about, because again, they all bind to soil. And although our forests are very permeable, and when it rains there, it absorbs. But when it hits the forest roads or staging areas that weren't reclaimed, or skid trails that weren't reclaimed, you have bare ground, and water's going to hit that, and it's going to run off because you're mostly on sloped ground most of the time up there, and it will find its way to streams. And so there are regulations that you have to follow in your forest activities and woodland activities. And so, like I said earlier, you'll want to delve into that with the local stewardship forester, and contact your Oregon Department of Forestry. And if you have a small woodlands, you could talk to the Soil and Water Conservation District or Watershed Council and see how they can help you with water management on your properties. So if you have livestock and grazing, now livestock in the state of Oregon includes what you would think it would: cows and llamas and bison and chickens and horses. So if you're a horse boarder, if you have a horse stable or you board horses, you come under the regulations of the area rules for agriculture. And so you're going to want to manage grazing to keep your pastures from degrading. On the left here shows a pasture that has lots of bare ground, not very good forage. And it's really, there is a drainage right to the right of the picture, which I don't have, that's been trampled over time. And this on the left is definitely a potential violation of Oregon's agricultural water quality rules, but is in no way helping you manage livestock. Poor forage and runoff and dirty water won't help them. Same with the horses. If you've On the right, they're in a nicely grass pasture, so you want to make sure your pastures are kept from degrading. You want to move your animals around to reduce soil compaction and maintain that ground cover, because again, soil compaction increases the amount of water that runs off the surface and doesn't drain into the ground, and so you're losing that water. You got to balance your grazing pressure with plant growth by rotating animals among pastures based on the number of animals, height of grasses, and timing of scheduled grazing. You want to add or develop sources of water for livestock that allows them to stay away from streams and wet areas. Putting in nose pumps and off water troughs, or getting an old bathtub and putting it near for a place where your livestock can drink away from streams is a benefit to you. Managing a sustainable stocking rate. If you have too many animals, you can't manage. It'll be next to impossible to keep your pastures from degrading. And once they're degraded, it takes several years and loss of productivity to get them back, and a lot of work. You're going to have to rip the soil, you're going to have to manage weeds, you're going to have to plant the forage, and you're going to have to irrigate it, and you're going to have to keep your animals off it until it's restored again. And so it takes money and time. So by thinking about how you manage your grazing, you won't even have to go there. Another thing you can do around your horses, around your livestock and horse stables and your heavy use areas, is you can provide these non-eroding surface for areas frequently used by animals and people to protect and improve water quality. So by designating sites for your animals during heavy use times, and making those heavy use areas contain any water and runoff so that it goes into the ground, because soil is a giant filter, and if you can get soil to go to the ground, it filters it out and comes out the end clean in your groundwater, and comes out through surface drainage into your streams clean. Also covering your manure, having a covered manure storage area. I think I have a little bit of that, more of that later. We'll talk about that a little later. So irrigation, like I talked about way early in the slideshow, hey, we've seen a big drop in water usage from irrigation because people are switching to different irrigation systems that help conserve water, and it also helps reduce that runoff that we were talking about, and soil erosion. I mean, we don't want water irrigation wherever you may be running onto sidewalks and cement. That just goes into our drains, our street drains, straight to our ocean. So anything that's on that parking lot goes into the stream, into the drainage system, in your curbs, and there is no filtering system there. It just goes straight down to the stream and then the ocean. And anything in that parking lot goes to oil residues, tire residues, whatever. Same with on your properties in rural areas and irrigating farmlands. You want that water to stay in your farm. You want it to be used there. And if it doesn't get used, you want it to get permeated back into your ground so you can use it when you need it. And reduce that runoff. That includes the bacteria, the sediment, nutrients, pesticides, toxics, all the things that I've already pointed out. And people are switching to better irrigation, drip. Drip irrigation can reduce soil erosion by like 80% in some cases. Or micro sprays, or sprayed and controlled irrigation in your rural properties. Now, you have to think about it. The type of irrigation for what your needs are going to vary, and it's a thought, and you have to think about it. But if you put the investment in now, over time, you will use a whole lot less water, and you'll use a lot less pesticides and fertilizers, because it's not all leaving your property. It's going to where it needs to be used. And so think about how you manage your irrigation, delivery, and applications. Here we go. Here's what I wanted to talk to you about: manure. So again, if horse stable owners and livestock, small family farms where manure collects, uh, you know, uh, you have to manage for it. This upper left photo is from a complaint we had in another county. These folks were storing manure in a pile right next to the stream, which is right behind them, as you can, where those trees are is a stream channel. And they were asked, they had to fix it. They were on our radar, and they were given a water quality advisory. And as long as you fix the problem, Oregon Department of Agriculture will not ever issue you a notice of noncompliance or ticket you or give you a civil penalty. Oregon Department of Agriculture, we have a progressive compliance approach. We notice the problem, we'll talk to you about it, we'll come on site, we'll see what we can do, we'll give you resources, we'll point you to the Soil and Water Conservation District, we'll give you some recommendations if you don't want to work with them, but they're always your best source for that information. And in this case, the picture on the top right was the solution to their problem. They worked with the Soil and Water Conservation District and put in a three bin composting facility with and had it covered. And if you don't want to go to that extent, if you're just going to move your manure off-site or apply it, the photo below shows how if you keep a covered managed manure site, you can then apply it agronomically to your field or dispose of it or distribute to individuals who may need it. So this slide is very important, streamside areas. Streamside areas are really, vegetation is really important in protecting the stream corridor and the associated wetlands from land use activities. Riparian areas or streamside areas, vegetation plays a really important function in water quality management. The vegetation filters pollutants from the overflow, the runoff we've been talking about. It also, the tree roots and shrubs hold in the stream bank and provide stability, prevent soil erosion, and prevent gullies from occurring. And the trees and shrubs also play a very important role in stream temperature. They provide shade and protect the water from the sun's heat. So those are all ways to help keep our waters clean. And an easy way, if you manage for that, it's an easy way for the long-term protection of water quality. And your management on your property will be a lot easier for you if you have really well vegetated streamside areas. Like I said earlier, the riparian rule requires landowners to allow for the ongoing growth and establishment of streamside vegetation. All three of these photos are violations of Oregon's regulations. The photo in the top left is a hazelnut field. It's an early establishment, and they went into the winter on sloped ground and bare sloped ground, and as a result, from stormwater runoff, there was active soil erosion and discharge into the stream that has very little vegetation along it in the upper right-hand corner. These individuals were willing to work with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, and got into one of their programs, and they planted a cover crop in all of their orchard aisles, and then planted streamside vegetation. And by doing so, they've put into place practices that will prevent and control soil erosion and sediment from getting into the stream. And by working with NRCS, Oregon Department of Agriculture backs off. We stay away, say, hey, you're working, you're fixing things, because that's all all of us really want, is just the pollution to stop. So as long as you're working toward that, no one's going to get a civil penalty or a violation or anything like that. Only when you refuse to work to fix the problem, that kind of stuff can come into play. We have what we call the progressive approach to compliance. So we'll always work with you. These other two photos are violations of the Department of State Lands fill and removal law. You cannot just go to your stream and clear the vegetation and take stuff. In these cases, these are low gradient streams. Well, the one in the middle is a low gradient stream along the valley bottom that floods every year and fills in with sediment. So it's not the landowner's problem, that it's not their fault that there's sediment in there, but they have to get in there to clean the sediment out so that water can drain and not flood the roads and their property. So they went in and did this without permission or permit from the Department of State Lands. Somebody saw this, called in a complaint, and all of us had to go there and see whose jurisdiction it was and work with the landowner. In that case, the landowner got an opportunity to kind of retrofit and go back and apply for their permit. But it costs money, and they caused a lot of issues that are going to cost them money to fix. Even though they got the permit, they still had to fix that. Same with the upper right, cropping. They wanted to crop. They started removing vegetation so they could increase the size of their cropping area. And this, this is, you can't do these things. You can't even do that on the right with the permit. You can't crop to the edge of bank. So these are things you got to think about, protecting those streamside areas. If you do that, you'll have long-term water quality protection, and you won't get yourself into trouble or having to spend a lot of money to fix mistakes. And like I said in the last slide, I had an example here. This is a situation where I went on a compliance investigation up in Columbia County. On the left is the condition of the stream channel when I arrived. These landowners just bought the property. They'd only owned it maybe a little under 2 years. They had a couple horses and some goats, and their goats and horses did not do this damage. This was legacy impacts from a previous landowner who had several cattle, livestock, cows grazing for many decades with unmanaged access to the stream. And so over time, all the vegetation just disappeared and is gone. And the stream is now eroding the banks. It is constantly slumping in. And in the picture on the left, let me get my pointer here. Over here off the picture frame is their home. So they were very motivated by the concerns of this erosion getting toward their home. And so they were lucky in the fact that this stream is a salmon stream, and there were a lot of individuals wanting to help fix that. And so with some grants and their own in-kind and cost share portion, restored the stream bank. Now, this was not an easy feat. It's over $100,000 to fix this stream corridor, and just a little section of it. Root wads, tree wads had to be brought in. They had to be bioengineered into the stream bank to keep the water from moving toward the house anymore. There were a few thousand plants planted in that dark brown area where it's dead, but it's not really dead. It's a straw blanket holding in grass and moisture for the plants to grow. And so, this is what you want to avoid. This will get you in trouble. And these landowners had purchased the property like this, so the Department of Agriculture wouldn't have made them responsible for this, of doing this work. We would have definitely required them to pull their horses and their goats off the stream to manage their grazing there. And they managed it, and they keep them over in a different area of their property. And they only let them out to flash graze from once in a while, and so they're in compliance. And eventually, over time, on the right, this picture here, will have lots of trees and shrubs, and it will regain the function that needs to be there. So my object of these two pictures is to just not go there. Manage your property so that you always have continued and ongoing growth of streamside vegetation. Livestock love those fresh roots, and so do wildlife. I mean, a lot of wildlife comes through here. They love those fresh roots and will eat them, and that prevents that ongoing recruitment and establishment. Pesticides and water quality, well, it's a big concern to a lot of people, but it's a tool in the toolbox that many people use to control pests and both insects and plant pests, invasive plants. And so I just want to make it known. I mean, there's probably many hours of discussion on this, but you want to choose practices that reduce your use and reliance on them in all practical purposes. If you can learn about integrated pest management, Soil and Water Conservation District, watershed councils, they all have information related to that and can help you. And if you're really into that kind of stuff, you can really design a way to manage pests and plants, invasive plants on your property for the long term without relying hugely on pesticides. So that's one way you can start manage for pesticides not being in the water. There's also, if you're going to use them, you want to make sure that they don't move off site. So like I said earlier, you don't want those residues getting picked up by runoff. You don't want it in the air, and you want it drifting off site, and you don't want it leaching into the ground. The Pesticide Stewardship Partnership is a program here in Oregon, and they do water quality testing for pesticides around the state in small watersheds, and they are finding water pesticide residues in the water column right now at less than human health benchmarks. And so we don't want that to get worse. So we really need to pay attention to how pesticides move on your property. Current state law requires that landowners and operators follow labeling instructions for transport, storage, mixing, and application of pesticides. So read the label. The label has everything you need. Yes, they can be really small font and hard to read, but you can go online and pull those labels up. Those labels have warnings if there's fish and wildlife concerns with that, if there's concerns for pollinators and bees, and where it says where and when you can use those pesticides. So make sure you read the label, use the correct chemical. If you're not sure, talk to a vendor and find out what are the correct chemicals for you to use on your pests. And and again, avoid drift and only apply the required amount. Overusing doesn't make it kill it anymore. They're already deadly chemical that are designed to take out those pests and invasive plants. And you're wasting your money. You're putting a lot of excess pesticides into the system that don't need to be there. And when you think about the cumulative impacts of pesticides, which aren't known yet in the water supply, let's just be conscious of it. And I'm going to end my presentation here on water conservation. And I'm sure we're all very, we live in the Willamette Valley. We've always gotten a lot of rain, and even through climate change or changing weather patterns, we still have a fair amount of water supply, although we're starting to see more drought, and we're starting to see it creep more up into the Willamette Valley. And as things change, as we move forward, it's anticipated that our water and our rain will come more concentrated earlier in the season, and we won't have as much in the summer, and so it'll all run off sooner, and we'll have to irrigate for more months in the year than we used to. And so think about how much water you use. Think about that 113 gallons a day each of us use in water supply, and how you can reduce that. And loss of water costs money. There are people who don't have water rights who have to buy water to irrigate. So we also want to keep our in-stream water preserved for the environment. It strengthens communities, and it makes water available for all those values that we talked about earlier. And so just be mindful of how much water you use, and if you're wasting it. And if you are, look for ways to reduce your water consumption. Well, I hope I answered enough of the questions and gave you enough of a background for you to go through your exercises and help you put your plan for your land together. You have luckily discovered a great resource in your community through the soil and water conservation districts and watershed councils. Utilize them. They have lots of knowledge. They'll come out and walk your property with you, talk about all these things we talked about, drainage. How do you want to use your property? What do you want it to look like? And what are your resources? And then put that plan together for the long-term conservation of your water resources and the protection of water quality. I really thank you for your time. I wish I was there in person and could answer your questions, but you can always contact me if you have any. Just call me, give me a call. Thank you.